The birthday cake rolled into the room beneath 40 glowing candles. Across the white
Wow, that
fondant,
looks
written in elegant gold, were the words, "Best Mom Ever, Vivian." Tao lifted his glass, slipped an arm around the woman beside him, and smiled at his wife. "She earned it, Adira." Uneasy applause rippled through the room. 40 guests turned toward Adira, waiting for tears. Instead, 11-year-old Wren walked to the cake, reached out with her fingertip, and slowly wiped Vivian's name off the frosting, one letter at a time. When the last letter was gone, she turned to face her father. For a moment, nobody breathed. Tao's smile hung on his face a beat too long, the way a smile does when the man wearing it has just felt the floor shift. "Wren," he said, and it came out softer than he meant. "Sweetheart, sit down." She did not sit down. She looked at him with an expression no 11-year-old should own. Not a tantrum, not tears, but a still, terrible understanding. And she said, clear enough for the whole table to hear, "You spelled her name right." A pause. "You never even come to my recitals." The gold was still smeared on her small fingertip. Beside Tao, Vivian let out a short laugh, the kind people use to fill a silence, and it landed in that room like a dropped glass. And Adira, at the far end of the table, finally stood. She did not run to her daughter. She did not raise her voice. She set her napkin down, smoothed it once with 2 fingers, and looked the length of the table at the man she had married. "Sit down, Tao," she said quietly. "You're going to want to be sitting down for this." He didn't understand yet. In a few minutes, he would understand everything. But to see how a birthday party became the night Tao Calloway lost the house, the company, and the daughter who had just wiped a stranger's name off her own cake, we have to go back 6 weeks, to the evening Adira first realized her marriage was already over, and she was the only one who hadn't been told. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video, share it, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps this channel grow. Now, let's begin. 6 weeks earlier, Adira Calloway stood at the window of a house most people would have called perfect. Ashcombe House sat behind a 1/4 mile of trees on Round Hill Road. Limestone, leaded glass, a kitchen the size of an apartment. From the outside, the Calloways were the family everyone measured themselves against. Tao was charming, successful, the co-founder of a development firm with his name etched in a lobby on Greenwich Avenue. He remembered the names of your children. He held your elbow when he talked to you. And for 12 years, he had called Adira the best thing that ever happened to me, usually with an audience. But she was standing at that window at 9 o'clock at night, holding a plate of dinner going cold because Tao had said he'd be home by 7 and hadn't called. It was the 3rd time that week. When he finally came in at 10:30, he smelled of a perfume that was not hers, and he kissed her forehead and said the traffic on the Merritt had been a nightmare, and she said, "Of course," and scraped the plate into the bin. She had been scraping plates into the bin for a while now. That was the thing no one tells you about a marriage ending. It does not end with a scream. It ends with a woman quietly throwing away food she made for a man who isn't coming home. Their anniversary that spring told her everything, if she'd been willing to hear it. 13 years. She'd made a reservation at the little place in the city where he'd proposed, worn the deep green dress he used to love, and waited at the bar with 2 menus and a bottle breathing on the table. He texted at 8:40, "Babe, buried at the office. Vivian and I are drowning in the Harbor Point numbers. Rain check. Order whatever you want. It's on me." She sat there another 20 minutes because leaving felt like admitting something, and then paid for the wine she hadn't poured and drove home. When Tao finally came in near midnight, he didn't mention the date at all, didn't remember it, she realized, watching his face, and he said the numbers were brutal and kissed the top of her head on his way to the shower. She stood in the kitchen in the green dress and understood with a calm that frightened her a little that she was already alone. She just hadn't been informed. The marriage she was still showing up for had quietly ended somewhere she couldn't see, in a leased apartment on Steamboat Road months ago. The one who saw it first was not Adara. It was Wren. A few nights later, brushing out her daughter's hair before bed, Adara felt the girl go still under her hands. "Mom," Wren said, to the mirror, not to her, "who's Vivian?" Adara kept the brush moving. "She works with Daddy. Why?" A long pause, the pause a child takes when she's deciding how much truth an adult can survive. "He talks to her in the car when he thinks I have my headphones in," Wren said. "He calls her the things he used to call you, and he laughs different." The girl turned around, and there was nothing childish in her face at all. "I didn't say anything. I didn't know if I was supposed to." Adara set the brush down and pulled her daughter against her, and over the small warm shoulder her own eyes were dry and very bright. Her 11-year-old had been carrying this alone. That was the moment the grief turned into something colder and steadier. That was the moment Adara decided to find out exactly what she was married to. She did not have to look far, because Vivian Marsh was not a woman who bothered to hide. Adara saw her 3 days later at the firm's spring reception, crossing the room on Tao's orbit like she'd been born to it. Vivian was 34 and beautiful in the deliberate way of a woman who treats it as a job. She had come up with nothing and wanted everything: the house behind the trees, the table at the club, the surname that opened doors, and she had decided somewhere along the way that taking it from another woman wasn't stealing so much as correcting a mistake the universe had made. When a young associate spilled a drink on her sleeve that night, Vivian smiled and said, just loud enough, "You'll want to be careful. People remember who ruins things." Then she let Tao fuss over the stain like it was a wound. Adara watched the whole performance from 10 feet away, holding a glass she didn't drink, and understood that this woman had no idea who she was looking at when she looked at the wife. But it was the ring that stopped Adara's heart. On Vivian's right hand, catching the light, was the Callaway signet, oxblood stone, a small carved falcon, 3 generations old. The ring Tao's grandfather wore until the day he died. The ring that lived in the safe in the library. The ring Tao had promised at Wren's christening would one day belong to their daughter. Adara did not spill her wine. She finished the evening, thanked the caterer by name, and drove home with the radio off. The next morning she opened the safe and found the small velvet drawer empty, a shallow, ring-shaped dent in the silk, and nothing in it. He hadn't just given another woman his afternoons. He had taken his daughter's inheritance off the shelf and put it on that woman's hand. That was the day Adara stopped grieving her marriage and started paying attention. And the more she paid attention, the bolder Vivian got. There was a dinner at the house that month, a work thing, Tao said, 6 people from the firm, and Vivian came in a dress that cost more than most people's rent, walked through the front door of Adara's home like she was measuring it for curtains, and ran a hand along the marble of the hall table on her way past. At dinner, she sat at Adara's table, drank Adara's wine, and said, laughing, "Tao, you have to let me redo this dining room. It's practically criminal what you're hiding under all this beige." Tao laughed with her. Adara passed the bread. Later, in the kitchen, Vivian cornered her by the sink, just the two of them, and studied her for a moment with something sharper than a smile. "You're very calm," Vivian said. "Most wives would be threatened by someone who works so closely with their husband." It was a test. A small blade slid in to see if it hit anything. Adara dried her hands on a towel and looked at her unhurried. "I've never been threatened by anything I could see coming," she said. Vivian's smile tightened by a single degree. She had wanted to find fear and found a flat, still surface she couldn't read, and it unsettled her more than tears would have. And then she decided, because women like Vivian always decide this, that the calm was stupidity, not strength. She turned and went back to the party. It was the second time someone had mistaken Adara's stillness for weakness. It would not be the last, and every one of them would pay the same price. What none of them saw was what that stillness cost. 12 years. She had built a life beside this man, thrown out the cold dinners, forgiven the small things, told herself the story everyone tells themselves. Holding her face steady in a kitchen while another woman offered to redo her dining room took something out of her that no one at that party would ever guess. But she had learned the one thing her husband never would. You can be breaking on the inside and still walk into a room with your spine straight and your plan intact. She was done being surprised. Now she was simply getting ready. Here is the part Town never understood, and it is the reason he walked so confidently toward his own ruin. Everything he owned had been built on Adira's family money. 12 years ago, he'd been a charming man with a good idea and empty pockets, and it was her family's trust that put up the seed capital, her signature that structured the firm's financing, her name quietly woven through the ownership of the company he told strangers he'd built from nothing. He had come to believe his own story so completely that he forgot the footnotes. He believed the house was his, the company was his, the money was his, and that Adira was a soft, lucky woman who had married up and would never make trouble because she had nowhere else to go. He mistook her calm for weakness. It was the most expensive mistake of his life. Adira brought what she'd found to the one person she trusted completely, Priya Nair, her oldest friend since college and, as it happened, a very good lawyer. They sat at Priya's kitchen island 2 towns over, where Town knew no one, and Priya listened without speaking for a long time. Then she took off her glasses. "You understand this isn't just an affair," Priya said. "He's not only cheating on you, he's moving your family's money to her, and he's doing it clumsily. And if I'm reading this right," she tapped the papers, "you still hold the controlling interest in everything. The house, the firm, all of it. He can't touch you." Priya paused. "But Adira, if you do this, you do it once and you do it clean. If he sees you coming, he'll lawyer up and drag it out for 3 years and put Wren in the middle of it. He can't know, not until it's done." Adira looked at the papers for a long moment. Then she said the only thing that mattered. "He put her name on my daughter's future. He doesn't get to see me coming." It was the last calm conversation she would have for 6 weeks. Then came the part she never told anyone, the one crack in her. That night, home alone after Wren was asleep, she sat on the cold stone bench in the orangery in the dark and came apart. Not gracefully, her shoulders shook, and she pressed the heel of her hand against her mouth so the sound wouldn't carry across the lawn. 12 years, a christening, a daughter carrying a secret she was too young to carry. She let herself have exactly 1 hour of it, there where no one could see, and then she wiped her face with the back of her wrist and stood up. Crying had told her nothing she could use. From that night on, she stopped being a wife and started being something Town never once imagined she could be, a woman with a plan and nothing left to lose. But it did not go smoothly, and this is where Town nearly won without ever knowing he was in a fight. 2 weeks before Wren's birthday, he came home unusually warm. Flowers, a bottle of the good wine, a hand on the small of her back. Over dinner, he slid a folder across the table. "Tax restructuring," he said easily. "The accountants want us to move some of the trust holdings under the firm's umbrella. Cleaner for everyone. Just needs your signature." He smiled at her the way he used to. "You've always handled this stuff better than me." And Adira, tired, aching, wanting for one exhausted second to just be a wife whose husband loved her, picked up the pen. She almost signed it. Her hand was on the page, because signing meant peace, and peace, even a lie of it, is a powerful thing to a woman who is grieving. Then her eye caught a single line 3 paragraphs down, and her blood gold cold. It wasn't a tax restructuring, it was a transfer. If she signed, control of the trust, the house, the firm, the leverage, all of it, would pass to Tao, and from Tao, she now understood, to Vivienne. He wasn't asking her to organize their finances, he was asking her to hand him the knife to cut her out. She set the pen down. She did not let her face change. "Let me have the accountants walk me through it first," she said lightly, and Tao, so sure of her, so certain she was harmless, said, "Of course, no rush," and refilled her glass. That was the closest he ever came to winning, and he never even knew the game was on. Adira went upstairs, locked the folder in her own drawer, and called Priya from the bathroom with the water running. "He tried to take it tonight," she whispered. "He almost had it." Priya was quiet for a second. "Then we stop waiting," she said. "How long until the birthday?" 12 days. 12 days, Priya said. "We'll be ready in 10. Because now Adira understood the whole shape of it. Tao wasn't hiding an affair anymore. He was planning an exit, quietly move the money, quietly push her out, and install Vivienne as the woman of the house, all while Adira smiled at dinner parties and suspected nothing. And Vivienne wanted more than the man. She wanted the life, the name, and this was the part that turned Adira's stomach. She wanted Ren, not out of love, out of ownership. Being mom was the last trophy left in the case. Adira saw exactly how far it had gone at Ren's spring recital. Ren had a solo that night, 6 weeks of practice, a small blue dress, a nervous thrill she'd talked about for days. Tao had promised twice that he would be there. His seat, front row, stayed empty. Adira watched her daughter step to the front of the stage, find the empty chair with her eyes, and falter for half a second before she lifted her chin and danced anyway. And something in Adira's chest cracked clean down the middle. But that wasn't the worst of it. 2 rows back sat Vivienne, in pearls, phone up, filming, clapping harder than anyone else when the piece was done, as if the child on that stage were hers to be proud of. Afterward, in the lobby, Vivienne walked right up to Adira, warm as sunlight, and said, "She's so talented, you must be thrilled." She didn't know who she was talking to, or worse, she did, and simply didn't think it mattered. "Tao asked me to grab some video since he got stuck at the office, so he wouldn't miss it." Adira looked at this woman holding a recording of her daughter that the girl's own father had been too busy to watch in person, and she smiled, and she said, "How thoughtful." Then she took Ren's hand and drove her home, and in the car, Ren said quietly, "Daddy sent his girlfriend," and Adira said nothing at all, because there was nothing safe to say that wasn't a promise, and she wasn't ready to make the promise out loud yet. Tao's answer to a daughter he kept disappointing was to buy things. A week later, he came home with a phone Ren hadn't asked for, and a bracelet too expensive for a child, and he set them in front of her at breakfast like a man laying down a winning hand. "For my girl," he said. Ren looked at the box, then at him, and said, "Were you at my recital?" The kitchen went quiet. Tao's smile flickered. "Sweetheart, work was, then I don't want it," Ren said, and slid the box back across the table and went to get her backpack. Tao laughed it off to Adira. She's 11, they're dramatic, but Adira had watched her daughter refuse a bribe with more spine than her father had shown in a year, and she thought, she already knows, she's just waiting, like I am. And Tao, drunk drunk on his own certainty, was about to hand them both the moment they were waiting for, in gold frosting, in front of 40 people. That was his reason for the cake, and it is worth understanding because it was not random cruelty, it was strategy, and that made it worse. Tao had decided the marriage was already over in every way but the paperwork. He believed the money was already his, the transfer only a signature away. So he chose the birthday to make it public, to introduce Vivian to their whole world, not as the mistress, but as the future, to force the transition in a room full of witnesses where Adara, if she wanted to keep her dignity, would have to smile and take it. Humiliate her once publicly, so completely that she'd never have the stomach to fight. And Vivian begged for the words herself, best mom ever, a claim staked on a child in the one place the child could not miss it. Tao thought he was announcing a beginning. He had no idea he was lighting the fuse on his own ending. So Adara let him plan his party. She let the caterer come. She let Tao, humming, choose the wine and test the string trio and confirm the cake instruction exactly as discussed. And while he did, she moved quietly in the 10 days Priya had promised. She did not sign the folder. Instead, using the control she still legally held, she quietly locked the trust down tight. The money, the house, the firm, every thread Tao thought was already his, secured so completely that the ground he was standing on belonged entirely to her, and he didn't feel it move. Then she wrote out the guest list for her daughter's birthday in her own even hand. 40 names, and every one of them chosen. Tao's partners, 2 board members from the club whose good opinion he prized above almost anything. Priya, playing the family friend, and Vivian. Adara insisted on Vivian, warmly, and watched something flicker behind her husband's eyes that she chose to read as guilt and he mistook for permission. 2 nights before the party, Adara sat on the edge of Ren's bed the way she had when the girl was small. Ren was quiet, picking at the hem of the blanket. "Are you and Daddy getting divorced?" she asked finally. Adara had promised herself she would never lie to this child, so she didn't. "I think we might, sweetheart, but I need you to hear the part that matters." She tipped Ren's chin up. "None of this is yours to carry. Not the phone calls you heard, not the recital, not any of it. You did nothing wrong, and you are not losing me. Not ever. Do you understand?" Ren's eyes filled, and she nodded, and then she asked the question that broke and mended Adara in the same breath. "Is Vivian going to be at my birthday?" Adara thought about the guest list in her own handwriting and the seat she had placed with such care. "Yes," she said gently, "but I promise you, after that night, you will never have to see her again." She didn't explain how she knew. She just smoothed her daughter's hair until the breathing evened out, and sat in the dark a while longer listening to a child sleep, gathering the last of her steadiness for what was coming. On the last night before the party, Tao brought her coffee in bed, kissed her forehead, and told her that she was the best thing that ever happened to him. She thanked him. She meant something entirely different by it than he did. He fell asleep in 4 minutes, the deep, clean sleep of a man with no idea, and she lay awake in the dark beside him, not with rage, but with a strange, quiet steadiness. Tomorrow her daughter turned 11. Tomorrow the whole thing ended. She had cried her 1 hour weeks ago in the dark. She would not need it again. The morning of the party, Adara awoke Ren early, before the caterers and the noise, and the 2 of them sat on the kitchen floor in their pajamas while the light came up gold through the tall windows. Adara gave her the real gift first, before any of the guests could see it. Not a phone, not a bracelet, but a small, worn photograph in a simple frame. Ren as a baby, asleep on Adara's chest, both of them exhausted and whole. "So you always know exactly who was there," Adara said. Ren held it for a long time. "I already know," she said, and hugged her mother on the kitchen floor, and Adara let herself have that, 1 clean minute of it, before the day began. Then the caterers came, and the trio tuned their strings, and the guests arrived in their good clothes, 40 of them filling the golden rooms with laughter that had no idea what was coming. Tao glowed at the center of it. Vivian arrived in oyster silk with a falcon ring on her finger, and Priya arrived in pearls and found Adara's eye across the room and gave her the smallest nod. And somewhere back in the kitchen, on a silver cart, a tall white cake waited under a cloth for its moment, with a name written on it in gold that only 3 people in the house yet knew about. And so the cake rolled in beneath 40 candles, and the gold script read, "Best Mom Ever, Vivian." And Tao lifted his glass and said, "She earned it, Adara," and the room turned to watch the wife break. She did not break. Her daughter reached the cake first, wiped the name away with one small fingertip, and turned to face her father with gold still on her hand. "You spelled her name right. You never even come to my recitals." And into that silence, Adara stood, smoothed her napkin, and said, "Sit down, Tao. You're going to want to be sitting down." He sat. Some part of him made him sit, and Adara spoke, quietly, so the whole room had to lean in to lose. "Everyone here thinks they're about to watch me cry," she said, "so let me save you the wait. I've known about Vivian for 6 weeks. I've known about the apartment and the phone calls and the recital she went to that you couldn't." Tao opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "That's the part some of you already suspected," Adira went on, mild as weather. "Here's the part he doesn't know." She turned, unhurried, to the 2 board members and to the gray-haired man from the firm's backers who had been seated all evening right by the window. "The house we're standing in, the company with his name on the glass, the money that paid for this cake, none of it is his. It never was. It's my family's. It's mine. And as of 9 days ago, every share, every deed, every dollar is locked under my name alone." A sound went through the room like wind through wheat. "He was going to have me sign it all away next week," she said. "I read the fine print." For a moment, Tao tried to save it the only way he knew how, with charm, the tool that had never once failed him. He stood, spreading his hands, turning that famous smile on the room. Okay, this is clearly there's been a misunderstanding, and this is not the place. Adira's had a hard few weeks, we all have. Let's not do this in front of—" He gestured at the guests, at the candles, at the whole beautiful evening he'd built. "Let's not ruin Wren's birthday." And that was the wrong word, ruin, in the wrong room, because from the doorway where she'd stopped to listen, Wren said, in a voice that carried, "You ruined it when you put her name on my cake." Nobody laughed this time. One of the club wives put a hand over her mouth. The gray-haired man by the window quietly took out his phone. Tao's smile finally came apart at the corners, and he looked, for the first time all night, like a man who had just heard a door lock behind him. Tao's hands would not stay still. One of them kept smoothing the tablecloth over and over, as if he could iron the last 2 minutes flat. Vivian laughed once, that same short, disbelieving sound, and said, "This is insane. None of this is—" And Adira looked at her directly for the first time all night. "You wanted to be part of this family so badly," she said, "so let me make it official. You're going to give me back my daughter's ring." She held out her hand, palm up, across the table. "The one on your finger, the one that was promised to an 11-year-old at her christening before you decided you'd earned it." For a moment, Vivian's whole face, the confidence, the ownership, the years of clawing, held its shape the way a windshield does the instant before it falls. Then she looked at Tao, and Tao, God help him, looked at her the way a drowning man looks at the person he's about to climb over, and said to the room, "Vivian pushed for all of this. The cake was her idea. I told her it was too much." And there it was, the great romance folding into "She made me do it" in under 10 seconds. Vivian turned on him then, and the beautiful, careful mask finally slipped all the way off. "Your idea?" she said, her voice climbing. "You told me she'd never fight you? You told me it was already handled, that the money was as good as yours? You promised me—" She stopped because she had heard herself, and because the whole room had heard her too. Not a woman in love, but a woman who had been promised a payout and just watched it evaporate. She looked around at 40 faces that had finally completely understood her, and she understood that there was nothing left in this room to win. Vivian picked up the ring. She turned it once in the candlelight, warm from a hand that had no right to it, and slipped it into her pocket for the girl it had always belonged to. Tao was talking now, fast and low, the words tumbling out of a man watching his whole life leave the room. Adira, look at me. We can fix this. 12 years. You don't throw away 12 years over one mistake. We have a daughter. Think about Ren." And that was finally the thing she answered. "I am thinking about Ren. I've been thinking about Ren, nothing but Ren, since the night she asked me who Vivian was, the secret you made an 11-year-old to carry because you were too busy to notice she'd heard everything." His mouth opened, closed. There was nothing behind his eyes now but the dawning arithmetic of what he had spent and what he had bought with it. Then she looked at the man she had married, sitting broken and small among the wreckage of a party he had built as a monument to another woman, and she said the only thing she said to him all night. "You wrote her name on our daughter's cake," Adira said quietly. "Ren just wiped it off. Now the rest of your life is going to feel exactly like that." Then she crossed the room to her daughter, took the small hand with the gold still on it, and the two of them walked out of the dining hall together while 40 people sat in silence and Tao Calloway stared at a cake with no name on it at all. It ended quickly after that, the way these things do once the truth is loose in a room full of people who matter. By the time the candles were cold, the man from the firm's backers had made 2 phone calls in the hallway. Within a month, Tao's name came off the glass on Greenwich Avenue. The company that had never really been his simply carried on without him. The club table went to someone else. The invitations stopped. Vivian, who had wanted the house and the name and the child, walked away with none of them and a reputation that preceded her into every room she tried to enter afterward. She had reached for another woman's whole life and closed her hand on air. Tao tried twice to come home. The first time he sent flowers from the same florist, a detail so tone-deaf Adira almost laughed, with a card that said only, "I can explain." She didn't answer. The second time he came in person and stood at the gate asking to see Ren, and Adira met him there herself and told him evenly that Ren could see him the moment Ren asked to, and that in 5 months she never had. She watched the last of the performance drain out of his face until what stood at the gate was just a tired man who had traded his family for a story about himself and could not, even now, understand the exchange rate. Then she went back inside, and the gate closed behind her with a slow hush, and that was the last time he stood on the land that had once, he thought, been his. There was a Sunday that winter when the house was quiet and the light came blue through the tall windows, and Wren found her mother on the stone bench in the orangery, the same bench, though the girl would never know it, where Adira had once come apart in the dark. They sat a while without talking. Then Wren asked, in the plain way of children who had decided the world can be asked hard questions, whether her mother was sad. Adira thought about it honestly because the girl deserved honesty. "I was," she said, "for one night. Then I got busy." Wren nodded like that was the most sensible thing she'd ever heard and leaned her head against her mother's shoulder, and the two of them watched the early dark come down over a lawn that was, now and for good, entirely theirs. Somewhere across the county, a man was learning to live small. Here, a woman sat with her daughter's head on her shoulder and a falcon ring locked safe in a drawer, and if you had looked at her face, you would not have called it triumph, you would have called it peace, and no one would ever again write another woman's name over her life. If you enjoyed this story, don't just watch and leave. Like this video, share it with friends and family, and most importantly, subscribe to this channel for more powerful and interesting stories. Bye. See you in the next one.